Okay, let's see. Could we have a roll call? Clerk
Trustee Anthony.
Present.
Trustee Foster.
Good evening.
Trustee Graham Hudek.
Good evening.
Let the record reflect Clerk Segrist is in attendance. Treasurer Slavens.
Good evening.
Trustee Snyderman.
I'm cold, but I'm here.
And Supervisor Williams.
Hello. Call for a motion to approve the agenda with two minor changes. There is going to be no board action this evening. And then secondly, due to Mr. Surchek's illness today, I asked him to not come this evening, stay home, get better. So we will not be covering the roads portion. So we'll only be covering the cemeteries portion this evening. And the roads portion is really just a recap of the meeting that we had with the internal group. And it was going to be a 5-minute presentation anyways, so it's just a real quick summary. So we can cover that at another time.
So moved.
Second.
Those in favor of the motion as presented, please say aye.
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 Where did the motion begin and end? You're all set.
All set.
All right, got it right on. That being said, we'll kick it over to you, Bob. Mr. Belair.
All right. Thank you. This is the most interesting topic anyway. It's better than roads.
Way back.
Not quite as complicated. Okay, we're going to run through some items on township cemeteries, something people don't think a lot about. But we do have 3 of them in the township that we're responsible for and we own and maintain. I'm just going to go through some of the items. I don't have a real long agenda. It's going to be more of information. Here's what we do. Here's some of the history of our cemeteries that we have in the township, and then some of the recent activities over the last couple of years that have spurred on the culmination of meeting tonight. And then at the end, I'm going to show you some options. Certainly not the only options, but you guys can decide if there are other options you want to pursue, and we can move forward from there. So there are actually 5 cemeteries in the township. I'll start from the bottom. Knollwood Cemetery, you all have seen that in the news lately. We don't own that. It's privately owned, maintained. Cherry Hill Cemetery, that's actually on Ridge Road, just south of Cherry Hill, out in Cherry Hill Village. At one time, the township did own that, but I think in the early 1900s, we deeded it over to that church, and I think a group that maintains it and operates it. So the 3 cemeteries that we do own and operate, Downer Cemetery, that one's closed. It's down on Michigan Avenue. I'll show you a map in a minute where these all are. Sheldon Cemetery, that's on Sheldon, just north of Michigan Avenue. And then the one we're really here to talk about, I think, more in detail tonight is Kenyon Cemetery out at Ridge and Jide. Here's a general map of the cemeteries. Up in the left is an overall township map, the 6x6 map. You can see where they're at. Down at the far right corner is Downer. Kind of in the middle, near the bottom, that's Sheldon Cemetery. And then way up there at the top, out on the natural beauty roads, is Kenyon Cemetery. Just some general information to give you a little more background on cemeteries. Those 3 cemeteries, they're not maintained by Public Works, but our Parks and Leisure Services Department actually maintains them. They contract right now for the lawn mowing, trimming out there. Currently, we pay about $5,000 a year to maintain those 3 cemeteries. They're funded through the general fund. I understand at one point, a decade or more ago, there used to be a cemetery fund, but the value of it and the funds in there were so small that they just moved everything over and it was absorbed into the general fund. We do have items that we still have a scale on, so we do bury people. Public Works actually performs that tasks. We excavate for the burial and we cover them. We also do cremation, excavations when called upon. Primarily right now we do those in Sheldon Cemetery. We do between 1 and 3 a year typically. You can see our costs right there, $1,200 for us to excavate during the week, $1,725 weekends and overtime. Sundays and holidays are $2,250. For us to come out and excavate for a cremation burial is $285. That's just pothole basically. 18 inches deep, 6 inches wide, that they put an urn in or a cremation box. Typically, they're PVC these days. Records, that's the interesting topic. So when
Rob, just say, can you
Yeah.
bury one on top of the other?
not on the cremations, no. They tip,
On the normal burial? Could you have a body and then have a cremation on top, or have
yes.
two bodies on top?
Yeah, you can absolutely do that. And that's kind of a standard practice from what I understand. So some people will have a smaller plot and they'll put a loved one in a cremation box on top because those only go down 1.5 feet.
Yeah.
Some of the more interesting topics, records. When I started down at DPW, that was 10 plus years ago. We had records down there. They had records up here in the community development area. They had records in the clerk's office. It wasn't really kept that well, so there were some really good records. There were some bad ones, but traditionally it was very disorganized. I'm going to show you a sample here. So on the left, this is what I would call a not real good record. That's actually a cash check from Bill Dingleday back in the 50s, and that's the sales receipt written on the back with a sketch of the plot that the people own. So that is the only record that family owns that plot. Moving to the right a little bit better, that's a typical plot, 20 by 25, but you can see over the years the notes have been written on it, who owns it, how it's changed hands. Probably not the best record keeping process. So that's some of the stuff we've been dealing with down there. We have family members that show up, they want to know where they can bury someone, and this is what we have to show them. Doesn't look the best usually. Just a little more aerial information on the cemeteries. Downer Cemetery, a lot of people don't even know that's there. It's kind of bordered between Old Michigan Avenue to the south there and New Michigan Avenue to the north. That cemetery predates I-275. When they put I-275 in, they had to move Michigan Avenue to the north. So they actually just left the cemetery there up on that hill.
So I'm sorry, is that west of 275? Where is that?
Yes,
Okay.
just on the southwest corner. You can actually,
Is that the gas station up there, or?
the gas station's on the opposite side, so west of there.
You can go up by the gas station up on the hill and make a left to get in there.
Oh, okay.
There's
Let's
a
see.
trailer park up there on top.
So you can see on the bottom right corner where Downer is, see the on-ramp on the I-275
Oh, that's the
south?
on-ramp. Gotcha. Okay, that's the
Yeah, you
on-ramp.
usually don't see it. There's a big slope right there.
I think I seen the fence. There's a fence around it,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, okay.
Sheldon Cemetery, by far our most organized cemetery. You can see everything's laid out in a grid. All the headstones are organized. We have a good inventory of who is there. That cemetery is still active. We bury a couple people in there a year, like I said. Not too many issues with that one. And kind of our problem child, Kenyon Cemetery. This is our oldest cemetery, probably. It's right up there with Downer. But you can see it's not laid out in that nice of a pattern like Sheldon is. The squares there represent plots that families own. They're typically 20 by 25 feet. Back in the early 1800s, they didn't have a nice GIS system like we have right now. So they just kind of went out there and guessed and buried family members, or in some cases, strangers. There is a headstone out there that says strangers. We don't know who's buried there. But they just kind of placed them out there randomly. When we overlaid the grid of where people's plots are, a lot of them lay outside of those plots. So we're trying to, right now, bend everything. But you can see there in the middle, up to the left, there's a lot of open area still. So that kind of goes to, or leads me into why we're here today. About 3 years ago, I had a plot owner come to my front counter and she was going to bury her grandfather out at Canton. And she looked at the map. She's in the far upper right corner, and we told her exactly where she was and the process, and we could excavate the grave and everything. And she said, okay, that's great, but I want to buy the 2 plots to the right. And I said, well, you can't buy those. And she continued and said, why? And I said, I don't know. It's a good question. We had always been under the understanding that the township had closed the cemeteries for sales, but I don't think it was ever officially done. So that's one of the options that we're going to discuss tonight, is officially closing cemetery plot sales, just so we have an official statement to tell people when they come to our counter. So she did pursue it a little more. At that point, I told her, all right, we're going to go out, we're going to get some more information on these cemeteries, come back in a year or two, and we'll have more information on these, exactly where people are buried, who's out there, what headstones, what information we have. I haven't heard from her yet, but she'll probably come back eventually, and I would imagine others might come. So in 2017, after we realized everything was really disorganized, we hired Mannequin Smith to perform a detailed survey of our cemeteries. Particularly, I had him focus on Canyon and Sheldon. Since Downer's full, it's old, we're not planning on burying anyone there. So they went out, they actually GPSed every headstone, they collected the data. We had them come in, they scanned every piece of paper we had, and then entered it into our content management system, OnBase. So right now, where we're at, we actually have a detailed survey in our GIS system. You can click on a headstone or any type of feature, and it will bring up every document that we have associated with it. So we can share that with plot owners, residents, anyone looking for information. Shortly after we compiled everything, we figured, okay, it's time to talk to a professional. We're not professionals in this. So we consulted with a certified, they call themselves cemeterians. He's a 6th generation cemeterian, runs in his family. He's out of, I think, Newark, New Jersey. So we had Larry Sloan in. We met with him. We gave him all of our information. We told him the issues we were having. You were there, Pat, at that one.
Yep.
So what he did, he took all of our information, went away. A month later, he sent us a list of recommendations. I have copies of that. It's the last page in the PowerPoint, those recommendations. But some of his options that he discussed. Downer, he said, all right, yep, that one's old. There's really not much there to work with. It's already closed, in our opinion. It's full. Just keep it closed. Sheldon Cemetery, all the plots are sold in there. It's still active. We're burying people. Develop a more detailed policy if we're going to proceed with this. The interesting one, Canyon Cemetery. There's a lot of open space out there still. He said there's a couple options you can really explore with that. You could close the cemetery officially, which I think would take probably just a township board resolution saying we're closing all these. Or we could explore another option. We could hire a consultant, look at developing part of that as a garden area, develop a detailed ordinance, policies that we operate under. And he recommended possibly developing what he called was phase 1. Open up 5 blocks in there. There are 5 of those squares that you saw. Hire someone like Mannequin Smith or another consultant to develop that garden area, and we could sell them. So from that 5 block area, he said we could develop 150 lots. He said typical cost on those nationwide, what he sees is about $2,000 per plot. They call them companion lots. They're little 3x5 areas where you could put 2 cremation burials and then 2 small headstones. When we develop the ordinance, if we proceed down that route, we would have to be very detailed on exactly what type of headstone, color, size, everything that we would allow. But it is an option. You know, I'm not recommending anything, but that option's there. If you were to sell those 150 lots in that garden area, you could generate up to $300,000. With that $300,000, the township could then start a perpetual care fund for our cemeteries, something we don't have right now to pay for the maintenance. A couple other things I want you to consider too. I mean, we're pretty much almost done here. We've heard from some people in the community already. There's a lot of historical value, especially out in Canyon, Downer. There's headstones dating back into the 1830s. So consider that when you really think about this, the historical value, preservation value of these. Also consider there's probably a lot of unmarked graves in these areas. That is something that we would probably move on to. They have subsurface scanning that runs behind a wheeled device that we could go out there, and if we wanted to move down that route, we could do some sort of subsurface investigation. Now, that's one thing Larry Sloan recommended, was that if we proceed down the route of option 2, establish a cremation-only burial site. That way, if there were old unmarked burials that are deeper, you would only be disturbing the top 18 inches. So you wouldn't disturb that old burial site. With that, I don't really have that much more information. We're kind of looking on a direction that the board wants to run down. The way I see it, there's a couple options. We could develop Canyon a little more, or we could just close everything. With that, we'll take questions.
Okay, I have a few questions. One with the records, you said they were kind of everywhere. Do you now have all of them?
Yeah, we have them all.
You have them all?
Yeah, we
Okay.
have them all, DPW. There's not a lot.
Okay, but you have
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, I could have printed more examples. Another interesting one we have is on another of Phil Dingleday's cash checks. It's a sales receipt that shows paid $2, paid $2,
Oh.
paid $2.
Installments.
Yeah, until they got to $10, I think, and it was sold.
And it was theirs.
Yeah.
Do you know what the cost of the scanning would be if we went that? Did he give you any ballpark figure?
He didn't give us prices
Okay.
on that. We could look into it.
I just out of
Probably
curiosity.
pretty pricey. It's a very
Okay.
specialized field.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we would have to bring someone in from out of state. I don't think there's
Okay.
anyone around that does it.
Okay. And then the other question I had was, you said that you do 1 to 3 burials a year. So people who own lots right now, or plots, you have records of who owns them? And if they move, they probably contact you with,
Yep. So the typical process is we'll either get contacted by the funeral home or the family. They'll come in, they'll bring what receipts they have.
okay,
We do require some sort of verification that you own that plot. Then we'll just work with the funeral home, scheduling the burial, excavation, the cover-up, everything.
sure. And then, do you know how many are out there that
That are
that
still
have been
vacant.
sold, but, yeah,
Sheldon, I bet you I don't know exact number, I could get it.
Okay.
But there's probably 100
okay,
out there maybe.
okay, thanks.
Yep.
Anne Marie?
Are we sure we know how many have been sold and people are holding paper on it, or is there a discrepancy there too?
We don't.
We don't?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Now Sheldon, we have pretty good records on, I think. But we have had some disputes in the past between family members.
So somebody might be holding paper that we don't know about. We could think it's an open plot and it might not be then.
Yeah, and that's part of the ordinance process. We asked Larry Sloan about that, and he said it's not just us that has this problem. He said it's commonplace all across the United States. He said what you would typically do in an ordinance is set a timeline in there that if somebody does not claim a plot within a certain time period, 10, 15 years, that plot becomes available.
Well, that's hard because
It is.
live longer than 15 years
And I just threw a number out. It could be a longer period.
on your Canyon Cemetery, there's a lot of trees. Are these trees in actual places then? Did they, on the map, is that what they did here?
Yeah.
Because looks like there's a lot of open spots. I mean, is one square a spot that they're
Yeah.
speaking of?
Yeah, those are 20 by 25 plots. So if you look at those, basically what he's recommending is 5 of those squares
In the
to
south-
develop a garden area.
Over
Now,
on the left?
it is kind of deceiving, actually, from the aerial also, because that aerial was taken, which most aerials are, they're taken in the fall with no leaves. So that area to the south is pretty heavily wooded. And to the east on the site, that area is pretty heavily wooded also. Right there. So you can see that grid on the far right, 3 wide basically, by 8. That area is pretty heavily wooded, so I don't even know if you would be able to bury anyone in there. And then that southern area in the middle, that's pretty dense woods also, scrub brush.
Would we consider removing some of the scrub to create a burial site? I mean, is that a possibility?
You
Did he
could,
Yes,
Yeah?
yes.
you could. I don't know what kind of opposition you'd get to that.
And why did he only recommend cremation plots and not regular plots?
Because they don't know exactly who's out there. There could be unmarked graves.
Oh, it's a way to find them, I guess.
Yeah. So if you wanted to move down the route where you actually allowed people to bury caskets at a depth of 5 feet, then you would have to go down the route of a subsurface scan of the entire site, which is pretty pricey.
Okay, thanks.
When was the last burial in Canyon? Do you know?
Probably 2 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, up in the upper right-hand corner there, we buried someone up there. And then, down the left corner, Terramino's own that. And I think we buried him about 10 years ago.
And the monuments that go in there, are they like a mixture then of historic and modern?
Yeah, they're the newer ones. There's not really a rule on it, but they keep with what's out there. I don't see anything too extravagant going in.
If we were to go with the garden option, and there would be some monuments as well, right, for
Yeah.
individuals? Now,
Yeah, so typically, if we went that route, you would probably see the inlaid into the ground, or it would be the wedge type that just comes up about 8 inches. And we would have to be very specific on those details if we went down that route. We would have to tell them exact colors, size, what can be on there, where they can be.
did Mr. Sloan have any? So when you take a cemetery that was founded in 1840, did he have any recommendations about monuments that might be consistent with what's already out there, or?
Yeah, he didn't get into details just because we didn't hire him to get into that much detail. But he did have recommendations when we were talking to him. He said, you need to design it with this type of headstone, this color, definitely to keep it in line with the historic nature of that area.
And that could be written into the ordinance?
Absolutely.
But there's also potentially some landscaping associated with this garden concept, right?
Yeah, typically what you would do, I've seen different ones where they put a wall around an area and designate that. They might have some different shrubs and landscaping around in there. It's really free reign. We would have to hire a consultant to do it.
Summer?
You said the woman came in and she wanted to buy the 2 plots. How often do people ask about purchasing plots?
The 10 years I've been down there, twice.
Okay.
Yeah.
For 10 years, I've been asking. I'm finally getting the answers.
He was one of them.
I'm very interested in plots at Kenyon, personally.
So just so I understand, looking at this diagram, one of those squares is a plot or a lot?
Yeah.
Because, and how many is, was it the 6 across spaces on that
Yeah,
other chart, or?
Yeah, typically what we would do with the old hand-drawn diagrams that we had, they were all laid out with 6 plots in each lot.
In each lot?
Yeah.
Okay. So if I look like where there's some color down in the lower left there, and there's some yellow and red, what is that representing? Are those urns versus caskets?
All of
or-
them, all of the red squares are headstones.
Oh, the headstones,
Yep.
okay.
And then the yellow, it's just highlighted. It's the name
That's
of the
the
person
name,
that
okay.
that is on the headstone.
Okay, and the reason you didn't know if she could buy the lots next to hers was not that they weren't owned by someone, but we just had no policy to sell it?
That's exactly it.
Okay, and so,
Yeah, so at that time, I'm sorry to interrupt you. At that time, I had called up to Melissa McLaughlin, Terry Bennett. You know, they've been in the community forever. I asked them, I said, did the township ever close these cemeteries officially? And they didn't know either. And they said basically it wasn't. It's just been one of those, don't talk about it. They're closed, but not officially.
so are the ones that have no color names or anything in them, are we assuming they are not owned by anyone, or they may be still owned?
There's no record of them being owned.
No record, so we have quite a few of them there.
Yeah.
That could be sold if we wanted
Yeah.
to do that.
Now, Mr. Sloan's recommendation was if we wanted to proceed with the Phase 1 garden area, he said focus on the area up front.
You mean towards the bottom?
Yeah, my light doesn't work on the screen. So to the bottom left, towards Ridge Road. Ridge Road is that purple line on the far left.
And the, oh, okay. Because the.
So you can kind
three-
of see the open area there in the middle. He
Yeah.
said that's what he would focus on, that area right in there.
Okay.
That's a pretty rough area there.
It is hilly.
We visited, it's hilly, it's got trees and shrubs, it's got some beautiful monuments there too, some of them the 1800s.
Yeah, there's a picture of it right there, standing at the gate.
It's not flat by any stretch of imagination, it sort of slopes away from the road.
Yeah.
And there's like a gully there, and it's, I don't know, if you buried somebody there, you'd have to, be hard to find.
Yeah, it has some topography out there. It really does.
Go ahead, Michael.
So if I'm not mistaken, you said that these are maintained by Leisure Services?
Yes.
So is it possible to ask Greg King some questions?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Greg's here, Jeff's here. Fire away.
Yeah, Greg is our local cemeterian, and I think I showed a lot of you. He wrote this book on maintaining Canton's and preserving Canton's cemeteries throughout the state.
So I just had, just some questions about Kenyon. So with regard to, I know that you do work with the HDC. This isn't in the Historic District Commission, but township preservation is pretty central to some of the work you do. At any point in time, has there been any discussion about concern over historic preservation by opening up the cemeteries? Or no?
There has not been recent conversations relative to that. However, there would be a level of concern if actions are taken that would affect the context of the cemeteries. And that goes directly to what was talked about with the if they are opened up or kept open, if you were to discuss types of monuments, flush monuments would be the type that they would be going after, you would think, right? Much excavation or earthwork would probably be frowned upon, just from my opinion. In fact, cemeteries of that era were traditionally built with a rough topography to offer a park-like setting for the visitors to come and actually enjoy. In fact, traditional parks of today are an offshoot of a style of cemeteries back in the 1800s.
And you said that there are potential, there is access to plots that would not require any type of removal of shrubs, if I'm correct, that area in the north central part?
Right. As I saw the map, I saw that there would be a possibility of six squares towards the front and center of the cemetery. If I could just mention the one issue with the surveys, in as much as they are very exact, they are measuring present locations of markers. And to that end, we need to be cognizant that markers have been moved, stolen.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of what ifs if you start getting down below the surface too much, which is again to Bob's point, cremains internment would, if chosen to open, keep the cemeteries open, cremains internment would be the most reasonable option.
And a garden is okay in terms of historical.
So I
preservation?
would have to know, before I answer that question, I would have to know what is being done to have a garden. Historically, you wouldn't have had a separate garden area in a cemetery of that nature. You would have had a youth area, a baby area, a potter's field area, possibly a veterans area. You wouldn't, then again, you wouldn't have had a cremains even discussion, right? I think from a historical context, at least my first thought is that making anything that would mark a border would probably be contrary and not necessary. If you're going to have 6 plots available, make them available, but so that it would flow right into the natural flow. Almost like putting in the plots, but you wouldn't even notice them unless it was you're going there to visit whomever you're going there to visit.
Yeah, and that would be the intent of hiring a landscape architect and a firm that specializes in these. They would lay it out so it blends right in with the existing environment.
What do you think, any ballpark figure on that?
Just the design of it, to get a concept, 5,000, 10,000?
Okay.
Yeah, what I'm going to ask you to do is go ahead and start laying out the business case for Kenyon to go with option 2. Get it on paper so the whole board can look at it, digest it, and say, hey, this makes sense, or, yeah, this is ridiculous. And include subsurface inspection
Okay.
to make sure that we're not desecrating anybody's sites. And then go ahead and start RBAs to close out the other 2.
Okay.
Formally, officially, make it, so it's, lock it up. And Sheldon property still, those are privately owned, so they can be transferred all day long between parties. Township has nothing to do with that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had
It's
a
an
couple
asset somebody
transferred in the
owns.
last year.
Yeah, so that can happen, too.
Yeah.
Bob, for Sheldon Cemetery, if somebody shows up once, do they have some paper, some identification that they own a particular plot?
Yeah, they'll typically have some type of proof of ownership, and then we look them up in our records also just to verify that we have something.
Are there plans to computerize our records?
That's what we did.
Oh, you already did it?
Yeah.
It's not just organized paper, it's
Yeah,
now
so I
on.
can actually get in our asset management system right now, click on a headstone, and it'll bring up every piece of paper that we have
Oh, okay,
associated with
great.
it.
All right, cool.
And I think what would be a great idea down the road, and we'll probably move that route, is to make these available online. So, because a lot of people do research
Yeah.
around the
Genealogy.
country to see where people are buried. I get inquiries once or twice a year, hey, is this person buried out there? But if we had that available online, it'd be pretty simple. Somebody could click on there and see what kind of information is out.
If we went with option 2, do you think that would change the yearly upkeep cost? Do you think that would stay right around $5,000 or?
It should stay the same.
Okay.
That's just mowing, trimming,
Yeah.
tree clearing as
Does
needed.
the cost of burial cover the cost of burial for us?
Yeah,
It does, okay. So
Yeah,
if we did these sales and had this fund, that fund could be kept up with the cost of burial as well.
Yeah, and Mr. Sloan in his report, I think on the last page, he made some recommendations on costs. We might even be a little bit high on ours,
Yeah.
on the burial portion, from what he recommends and has seen as a national average. But ours is a true cost of service calculation. We went through it a couple years ago, and we update it every 2 to 3 years. So we actually look at the labor, the equipment, the materials that we use.
And have we reached out to like the Historical Society at all to talk to them about this, or is this just this is the first conversation we've had? Because just from a stake of, if we decide to go with option 2, I would like to maybe meet some potentially challenging conversations off at the pass and see if we can get input in a way that makes it better for everybody. And
So as the liaison to the Historic District Commission and the Historical Society, we are having a meeting next Wednesday with the Historic District Commission. I will be happy to bring that up to them and kind of get a feel for what, and I can let Bob know that information, or if I can talk to you direct.
Yeah, that's a good idea, and we did talk about it at one of our meetings, just briefly. There will be that concern from certain individuals. A lot of people, I don't know how many are out there, but there will be people that say, don't touch it,
I understand.
I'm sure.
Just access.
Yeah, and that's another
That's-
thing to consider.
There
With
is-
Kenyon in particular, there's no parking out there.
Right.
You-
There's no shoulders. In fact, my mirror, when I worked in parks,
Yeah.
my mirror was ripped off my truck when I was up on the hill out there. I mean, it's tight.
So you have to park and walk in then, basically?
You have to
would.
park on the edge of the road. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you can't pull into the cemetery.
Mm-mm.
It's not accessible by a vehicle that well.
Anything we can do to make it accessible and
Natural
take
beauty.
part of it, or is that a historical
Now,
thing?
now without encroaching
Yeah.
on the cemetery, most of your, if you look at the markers, the majority of them are right on the fence lines.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, there is somewhat of a driveway that goes through there.
Okay.
I would encourage you to visit it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Certainly.
Yeah.
It
At
is a
night?
nice cemetery. Yeah,
Tonight.
Nice.
When it warms up.
and it is like a park out there.
I went out there recently. I had read online that there was a potential Indian trail, like a native Indian trail tree there, but I couldn't find it. I went out looking.
Take you to that tree. It's in the back right corner.
Yeah, I know right where it's
Okay.
at. It's the
Yeah.
one with the branch that sticks out. It's very distinct.
Yeah.
Very distinct.
I couldn't find it while I was out there, but I explored the cemetery a little bit, and I grew up at Joy and Ridge Road, and so we used to walk past there down Jide Road. So definitely interested in
Very picturesque.
maintaining the
Yeah.
historic nature of a. I don't hang out in cemeteries very often, but
Some people do.
some people do.
Yes, we do.
Any additional comments, questions?
Well, you were
Anne
saying,
Marie?
maybe we should put it out there, huh, that you want to talk about having teachers go out and do the scrapings?
I'm sorry?
Putting online basically that you really don't want people, I don't know, do we have a place for that? You were saying you shouldn't really
The
be.
book was actually written for the State Historic Preservation Office of Michigan. And it is considered to be their manual for cemetery preservation. I still get calls referred to me through the SHPO about that sort of thing. And there is a wealth of information online that generally tells you not to do rubbings. And in fact, relative to rubbings, and I don't want to take up time, but you're actually better off with good lighting and black and white photography. You will get more from it than you will from a rubbing.
Should we put something on, do we have anything online about our cemeteries? Would we want to put something like that, asking people not,
That would be easy to do.
not to go out
I don't
and,
think we have much information at all, other than the burial costs.
yeah, maybe let people, it's a historic site, and not to do rubbing, and
Yeah.
why?
Well, that would be part of the ordinance.
Oh, yeah, that'd be in the ordinance.
That would
for
Put in the
sure.
ordinance.
Yeah.
All right.
It's exciting.
Okay. Seeing no further questions, any additional comments?
Is anyone in the audience?
Oh, public comment? Is there any public comment?
Oh, come on.
Seeing no public comment?
Ghost stories.
I have a quick question, Pat.
yeah, go ahead. I'm
Can we ask Bill to present on the roads
Yes,
plan?
we're going to bring
the
him
next
back.
meeting? Okay.
Maybe at the next meeting even.
Yeah.
Because it was going to be very brief,
Yeah.
so.
There was a lot of good information at the internal work group.
Yes, so that is planned. As soon as he feels better, we'll get him scheduled in.
Thank
So-
you.
Yeah, you
Probably
didn't want
next
him
meeting.
here tonight.
Yeah. No, I'm good with that.
Call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Those in favor of the motion as presented, please state aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.